I am Ethan, 32 years old. 5 years ago, my entire family violently destroyed my life over a completely fabricated lie at my cousin's wedding. While I was literally bleeding on the floor, struggling to breathe and trying to understand why I had just been brutally assaulted from behind, my own mother looked down at my shattered face and said the words that still ring in my ears every single night. She looked at me with absolute disgust and called me a monster. They humiliated me in front of hundreds of guests, treated me like a criminal, and threw me out of the family like a bag of rotten garbage. But there is one thing they did not know. The architect of that vicious, life-ruining lie was about to face a brutal, messy divorce that would expose absolutely everything she had done. Her web of deceit was going to unravel in the most spectacular way possible. And now, the very people who discarded me are crying, begging on their knees for a second chance. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I made them pay for their betrayal, hit like if you believe in true justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let us go back to where this absolute nightmare began. I want you to paint a picture in your mind. Imagine sitting in a quiet, dimly lit home office, staring at a computer screen. On that glowing monitor is a Zoom call grid. In those little digital boxes are the faces of the people who gave you life, the people you grew up with, the people whose blood runs in your veins. My mother, my father, my cousin Lucas, my Aunt Evelyn and my Uncle Arthur, my own siblings, the entire clan. They are all looking at the webcam, and they are weeping. I am not talking about a few polite tears. I am talking about real, heavy, ugly, desperate sobbing. Lucas looks like a ghost. He looks like a man who has not slept a full night in half a decade. His eyes are hollow, his skin is pale, and his shoulders are slumped in absolute defeat. My mother is clutching a crumpled tissue, her chest heaving, begging for my forgiveness through the microphone. Her voice keeps cracking. She keeps saying she is so incredibly sorry. She keeps saying she wants her beautiful son back. She says the family is broken without me. I just sat there. I stared at the screen, listening to the digital audio compress their weeping. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, no vindication. Just a cold, hard, impenetrable emptiness. Because here is the brutal reality of human relationships. You cannot take a sledgehammer to a mirror, smash it into a million jagged pieces, and then expect it to give you a clear reflection ever again. You cannot spend 5 years treating your own flesh and blood worse than a convicted felon, and then expect to press a magical reset button the second you realize you were the fools all along. You do not get to dictate the terms of forgiveness when you were the ones who held the execution. But to make you fully understand the absolute, bone-deep satisfaction I felt in that moment of silence, I have to take you back. I have to take you back to June 15, 2019. The day my life as I knew it ended. It was supposed to be the happiest day of our family's collective history. My cousin Lucas was marrying Chloe. It was a beautiful, crisp Saturday morning just outside Portland, Oregon. The venue was absolutely stunning. One of those rustic, high-end farmhouse setups with exposed wooden beams, crystal chandeliers, and acres of manicured gardens that cost way too much money. I was wearing a tailored navy blue suit that I had bought specifically for this day. I spent an entire week's salary on it because I wanted to look perfect for the photos. Lucas was not just my cousin. He was my brother in every way that mattered. We spent our entire childhood side by side. I knew his deepest secrets. He knew mine. We were blood and we were best friends. I arrived at the venue 3 hours early to help set up. I am the kind of guy who likes to be useful. The caterers were running late. The florist had accidentally put the wrong floral centerpieces on the head table, and the general stress level was climbing toward a boiling point. But I was genuinely happy. I was standing in the grand foyer, carefully pinning on my groomsman boutonniere, adjusting my expensive silk tie in the reflection of a large antique mirror, and smiling at myself. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw an elderly couple looking completely lost near the grand entrance. They were distant friends of my Uncle Arthur, dressed in their Sunday best, and they were clearly struggling to find the restrooms before the ceremony began. I walked over, offered my arm to the older woman, and gently guided them down the long, polished hardwood hallway. I was making light small talk, joking about the unpredictable Portland weather, completely and utterly oblivious to the Category 5 hurricane that was about to hit me from behind. I heard heavy, aggressive footsteps thundering down the wooden floorboards. It sounded like a stampede. Before I could even turn my head to see what the commotion was, a massive, solid weight slammed violently into my upper back. A closed fist connected with the side of my face so hard that my vision instantly flashed pure, blinding white. The force of the blow lifted me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, my shoulder crashing into a decorative iron floral stand, dragging it down with me. Glass vases shattered everywhere. Cold water and crushed white roses covered the floor. I scrambled to my hands and knees, my ears ringing with a high-pitched, deafening whine. I tasted copper in my mouth. Lucas was standing over me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. A kind of hatred I had never seen directed at another human being, let alone me. Behind him stood Marcus, his best man, and two other groomsmen from his college fraternity. They looked like a pack of wolves cornering wounded prey. Before I could even process what was happening, Lucas lunged forward again. He grabbed me by the collar of my ruined, expensive suit, yanking me upward, and drove his fist directly into my nose. I heard a sickening crunch. Warm, thick blood instantly poured down my face, soaking into my pristine white dress shirt, permanently staining the navy lapels. I threw my hands up in a defensive posture, coughing on my own blood, desperately begging him to stop. I asked him what was wrong. I asked him what I had done. He was screaming at me, his spit hitting my face. The words were a chaotic blur of absolute hatred. He called me a traitor. He called me a parasite. He screamed that I had destroyed his life, his future, his dignity. He kicked me hard in the ribs while I was on the floor, the heavy toe of his dress shoe cracking against my side, before Marcus finally grabbed him around the waist from behind and dragged him backward, yelling at him to calm down. The elderly couple I had been helping was screaming in terror. The heavy wooden doors to the main hall burst open, and guests began pouring out into the foyer. My mother pushed her way through the horrified crowd. She saw me bleeding on the floor, clutching my ribs, my suit destroyed. But instead of rushing to my side, instead of acting like a mother and asking if her son was okay, she looked at Lucas. Lucas pointed a shaking, accusatory finger directly at my bleeding face and screamed at the top of his lungs, echoing through the entire venue, that I was sleeping with his bride. He announced to the entire congregation that I had been having a secret affair with Chloe for months. I spat a mouthful of blood onto the hardwood floor and tried to speak. My lips were already swelling. I told him he was out of his mind. I told him Chloe was like my little sister. But the look in my mother's eyes stopped me cold, freezing the blood in my veins. She looked down at me, her own flesh and blood, bleeding from the face, and her eyes were completely devoid of maternal love. Disgust radiated from her every pore. The venue manager was shouting, threatening to call the police to file a lawsuit for the damages. The wedding was over before it even started. And my nightmare, my long descent into hell, was just beginning. To truly understand the sheer, unfathomable insanity of that accusation, you have to understand the deep roots of our shared history. I grew up in a classic, medium-sized suburban town where everyone basically knew everyone else's business. The kind of town where your high school reputation follows you to the grave. Lucas and I were inseparable. We shared a room on every single family vacation until we were 18 years old. We built tree houses in the woods behind his property. We broke windows playing baseball in the street. We covered for each other when we snuck out past curfew. We even promised to use our future college fund money to start a business together one day. Chloe lived exactly 3 houses down the street from my parents. She moved into our quiet neighborhood when she was just 8 years old. She was the annoying little girl with scraped knees who constantly followed us around the block. But as we got older, she became an integral part of our unit. I helped her study for her agonizing middle school math exams at my kitchen table. When she turned 16, I was the one who taught her how to drive in my beat-up, terrifyingly unreliable Honda Civic. I literally sacrificed my car's transmission grinding gears so she could pass her license test. I viewed her the exact same way I viewed my actual biological sister, Jenny. When Lucas and Chloe finally started dating in our junior year of college, the entire family rejoiced. It was the perfect, picture-book hometown love story. I was genuinely thrilled for them. I helped Lucas pick out the diamond engagement ring. I helped him scout the location to propose. The idea that I would ever touch Chloe, or that she would ever look at me in a romantic or sexual way, was so utterly repulsive, so fundamentally incestuous in my mind, that it felt like a sick, twisted joke. But absolutely nobody was laughing when I arrived at the emergency room. I sat alone in a sterile, freezing white cubicle with a plastic bag of crushed ice pressed firmly against my throbbing face. The ER doctor, a stern woman with a clipboard, asked me if I wanted to contact a lawyer or file a police report for assault. I declined. Even after the beating, I could not bring myself to put my cousin in a jail cell. She told me my nose was miraculously not broken, just severely bruised and internally swollen. But I would have a spectacular black eye for weeks, and my bruised ribs would make breathing painful for a month. I sat on that crinkly paper bed and tried to call Lucas. It went straight to voicemail. I tried to call Chloe. Voicemail. I tried to call my mother. Nothing but the endless ringing tone. Then, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text message from my father. It was short. It was brutal. And it changed the trajectory of my life forever. The wedding is canceled. Clear your stuff out of the garage by tonight. Do not come inside the house. I stared at the cracked screen of my phone until the black letters blurred together. I had moved out of my parents' house years ago into a small apartment downtown, but I still kept boxes of precious childhood memories, my old vintage baseball card collection, and heavy college textbooks stored in my parents' garage. The fact that he was telling me to come get my trash was not about the physical boxes. It was a clear, unmistakable message. I was being evicted from the family hierarchy. I was being erased. I drove home with one eye completely swollen shut, a bag of melting ice dripping onto my ruined suit pants. It is incredibly dangerous to drive with absolutely no depth perception, constantly having to twist my aching torso and bruised ribs just to check my blind spot, but I had nowhere else to go. I pulled into the familiar concrete driveway. The faded blue paint on the house looked exactly the same as it had for 20 years, but it suddenly felt like enemy territory. My sister Jenny's sedan was parked in the driveway. My brother Mark's heavy-duty truck was parked aggressively on the front grass. The whole family had gathered. It felt exactly like I was arriving at a funeral. My own funeral. I walked slowly up the driveway and punched the 4-digit code into the garage keypad. The heavy metal door groaned open. My mother was standing in the doorway leading to the kitchen, her arms tightly crossed over her chest. My father stood right behind her, his face a mask of stone. Mark and Jenny were sitting at the kitchen island, staring at me like I was a stranger who had just broken into their home. The silence was heavy, suffocating, and deafening. I stepped forward into the dim light of the garage. I held my hands up, palms open, a gesture of absolute, total surrender. I begged them to talk to me. I begged them to tell me what was going on. I asked for proof. I asked for a single text message, a leaked photo, a reliable witness. Anything that could justify this madness. My mother scoffed, a harsh, cruel sound. She actually rolled her eyes at my bruised, bloody face. She told me to stop playing the victim. She said Lucas had a highly reliable source. Someone had seen me and Chloe together. Someone knew all about our secret, disgusting meetups. I raised my voice, the pain in my ribs flaring. I asked who? Who saw us? When? Where? My father stepped forward, his boots heavy on the concrete, and pointed a rigid finger directly at my chest. He said the specific details did not matter. What mattered was that I had humiliated the family in front of the entire town. My older brother Mark walked over, picked up a cheap canvas duffel bag from the floor, and threw it violently at my feet. It hit my shins hard. It was filled with random, loose items scooped from my storage boxes. He had literally just shoved my memories into a bag to expedite my departure. Mark looked me dead in the eye and told me I was a total disgrace. Jenny, who used to come to me for advice about her own relationships, would not even make eye contact. I looked at my mother. I asked her directly how she could possibly believe this. I reminded her of the time I grounded myself for a month in high school because I felt so guilty about sneaking out to a party. I reminded her that I could not even tell a lie about eating the last piece of pie at Thanksgiving without turning bright red and confessing. I asked her how she could effortlessly discard 27 years of knowing my moral character based on a faceless rumor. She looked at me, her expression completely flat, and said she did not know who I was anymore. I slowly bent down and picked up the duffel bag. I turned around and walked out into the fading sunlight. I did not yell. I did not scream. The pain in my chest was so incredibly sharp I could barely breathe. It felt like someone had reached directly into my ribcage, bypassed my lungs, and crushed my heart with their bare, cold hands. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological torture. The vicious rumor spread through our tight-knit suburban town faster than a California wildfire. You do not truly realize how deeply embedded you are in a community until that community collectively decides to chew you up and spit you out. On Monday morning, desperate for a sense of normalcy, I tried to go to my regular gym to burn off the suffocating anxiety. The manager, Steve, a guy who used to spot me on the heavy bench press every Tuesday, pulled me aside near the entrance. He would not even look me in the eye. He told me they were formally reviewing my membership contract. He suggested, in a low, threatening tone, that I find a different facility because my presence was causing a major disturbance among the other members. Lucas worked out there. Lucas's friends worked out there. Everyone took his side without a single question. I left the gym and went to get my morning coffee. The local barista, a girl who usually had my complex order ready before I even reached the cash register, handed me my paper cup without making eye contact. She did not say hello. She just slid the cup across the counter and moved on to the next customer in total, freezing silence. I was officially a ghost, a walking pariah in the town I had called home my entire life. But the real breaking point, the moment my livelihood was threatened, happened at work. I was a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized logistics company, on track for a major promotion. I walked into the corporate office on Tuesday, wearing dark sunglasses to hide my horrifically bruised face. By lunchtime, I received a cold email. I was called into human resources. I sat in a sterile glass office across from an HR representative named Susan. She folded her manicured hands on her mahogany desk and told me, in that fake corporate whisper, that several employees had expressed deep concern about my personal conduct outside of work. The toxic gossip had breached the professional walls. She mentioned the company's strict morality clauses. She did not outright fire me. She knew a wrongful termination lawsuit would be messy, but she strongly suggested that a transfer to a different regional branch might be best for company morale and my future salary prospects. I was being threatened with a court of public opinion, fighting for custody of my own professional reputation, and I was losing miserably. Later that week, as I sat alone in my dark apartment nursing a glass of cheap whiskey, my phone finally rang. It was an unknown number. I answered it cautiously, and immediately heard heavy, ragged sobbing on the other end. It was Chloe. She sounded like she had been crying for 100 years. Her voice was entirely shattered, barely a whisper. She told me she was calling from a prepaid burner phone she bought at Walmart because her parents had confiscated her actual cell phone to aggressively scour it for evidence of our affair. Evidence they obviously did not find, but that did not stop them. We talked for 2 agonizing hours. It was the most depressing, soul-crushing conversation of my entire life. We compared our fragmented notes. We realized that neither of us had been given a fair trial. We had just been summarily executed by the people who claimed to love us. Chloe told me that her deeply religious parents had not just canceled the wedding catering. They had essentially excommunicated her from their lives. Her father, Mr. H., had literally invited their church pastor to the house to pray over her, as if she were possessed by a malicious demon of lust. When she adamantly refused to confess to a sin she did not commit, her mother went upstairs, packed up her entire childhood bedroom into black plastic garbage bags, and dragged them out to the front porch. They left her irreplaceable photo albums, her high school diplomas, and her beloved childhood stuffed animals sitting out in the pouring rain. Her father even threatened to legally revoke access to a college fund he had set up for her future children. Chloe had also lost her job. The marketing firm she worked for was heavily connected to my Uncle Arthur's lucrative commercial real estate business. Suddenly, her biggest accounts were reassigned to junior employees. She was written up twice for being distracted. She was quietly, systematically pushed out the door to protect the firm's relationship with my uncle. We both sat on the phone, thousands of miles of emotional distance between us and the families we once loved. We realized there was no fighting this absolute madness. How do you logically prove a negative? How do you prove you did not sleep with someone? You cannot. And the more aggressively you fight, the more defensive and guilty you look to people who have already cemented their judgment. I made a final, unshakable decision that night. I was not going to stay in a toxic town that treated me like a contagious disease. I formally applied for an immediate corporate transfer to my company's office in Boston. I packed my entire life into the trunk and back seat of my car. I did not hire professional movers. I did not throw a bittersweet goodbye party. I just loaded cardboard boxes in the dead of night. But the ultimate betrayal, the final knife twist that permanently severed my emotional ties to my family, happened the day before I left for the East Coast. I realized I had forgotten my original birth certificate and some essential financial documents locked in my father's home office safe. I absolutely needed them to finalize my new apartment lease in Boston. I drove to my parents' house one last time. I parked 2 streets down so my car would not be seen in their driveway. I walked through the neighbor's yard to the back of the house, intending to use the spare key hidden under the potted fern on the patio to sneak in, grab the papers, and vanish. The kitchen window was cracked open to let in the summer breeze. I could hear hushed voices inside. It was my mother and my Aunt Evelyn, Lucas's mother. I froze in my tracks. I crouched below the windowsill, my back pressed against the siding. My knuckles turned stark white as I gripped the brick wall. I heard my Aunt Evelyn sigh deeply. She said, "I know the story sounds a little crazy. Lucas has always been incredibly jealous, and he tends to wildly overreact when he feels threatened." My mother replied, and her exact words stopped my heart entirely. She said, "I know, Evelyn. Ethan has never lied to us. He's a good boy." But the invitations were already sent. The caterer was paid thousands of dollars. The whole church congregation knows about the accusation now. If we backtrack and publicly say Lucas made a mistake, the family looks ridiculous. People will talk. Could affect Arthur's real estate deals. It is easier to just let Ethan take the fall for this. He is strong. He will move on eventually. We have to protect Lucas's reputation in the community, and we have to protect the family inheritance from a messy public scandal. I stopped breathing. The ringing in my ears returned, louder than ever. My own mother knew. She knew the accusation was full of massive, glaring holes. She knew my moral character, but she actively chose the family's social standing and financial reputation over her own son. She sacrificed me to the wolves of public opinion just to avoid a little embarrassment at the local country club. It was a cold, calculated transaction. I was the currency she willingly paid to keep the family name clean. I did not go inside. I walked away from the window, walked back to my car, and drove away without my birth certificate. I would order a new one from the state government. I changed my cell phone number that very afternoon. I blocked every single email address associated with my family. I deleted my social media accounts. I wiped my existence from their reality. As far as I was concerned, Ethan, the devoted son, was dead and buried. I drove cross-country to Boston. I watched the landscape shift from the towering green pines of the Pacific Northwest to the flat, rolling plains of the Midwest, and finally to the dense, fast-paced brick architecture of the East Coast. Every mile I drove was a mile of permanent distance between me and the poison of my past. I arrived in Boston with 2 suitcases, a bruised face that was finally healing to a dull, sickly yellow, and a heart made of solid, unbreakable ice. Boston was exactly what my shattered soul needed. The glorious, liberating thing about a massive, sprawling city is the absolute anonymity it provides. Nobody cared who I was. Nobody looked at me with suspicion when I walked down the aisle of the grocery store. The baristas at the local coffee shops did not know my twisted family history. They just wanted to know if I wanted oat milk or regular in my latte. I threw myself into my new corporate position with a manic, unrelenting obsession. Without mandatory family dinners, obligatory weekend barbecues, or exhausting sibling drama to distract me, I had 80 hours a week to dedicate entirely to my career. I was the first one to swipe my badge at the office in the morning and the last one to leave the parking garage at night. I absorbed complex data, optimized massive logistics routes, and started pitching innovative financial strategies directly to the senior partners. My relentless dedication quickly caught the eye of the regional CEO, a brilliant, no-nonsense man named David. David was ruthless in business negotiations but possessed a rare ability to recognize raw, unfiltered talent. He did not care about my background, my hometown, or my family lineage. He only cared about my output and my drive. Within 2 years, under his direct mentorship, I received a massive executive promotion. My salary more than doubled. I started building a robust, aggressive 401k portfolio. I moved out of my cramped, noisy studio apartment and invested in a beautiful, historic piece of real estate in a quiet, affluent neighborhood. I was succeeding beyond my wildest, most ambitious dreams, completely independent of the people who confidently predicted I would amount to nothing. And then, in the midst of my professional triumph, I met Sarah. I met her at a high-end corporate charity gala raising money for local schools. She was a lead architect at a rival firm, brilliant, sharp-witted, fiercely independent, and incredibly grounded. We clicked instantly over a shared hatred of pretentious networking events. When things started getting serious after our 5th date, I knew I had to tell her the truth about my past before we went any further. I did not want any ghosts haunting our foundation. I sat her down in my spacious living room, poured 2 glasses of expensive red wine, and laid out the entire ugly, unvarnished truth. I told her about the wedding, the violent punch, the baseless accusations, the loss of my family, and my self-imposed exile. I fully expected her to look at me with pity, or worse, deep suspicion. Instead, she calmly set her wine glass down on the coaster, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "They sound like a toxic, narcissistic cult. You survived them. I am incredibly proud of you." That was the exact moment I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was going to marry her. Sarah became my anchor in the storm. She patiently helped me rebuild the capacity for trust that I thought was permanently shattered. We built a beautiful, quiet, incredibly fulfilling life together. Chloe and I kept in touch through a secure, private email thread. She had settled down in Chicago, found a brilliant, kind-hearted software engineer who treated her like a queen, and was thriving in her own demanding career. We were 2 scarred survivors who had successfully escaped the blast zone and built empires from the ashes. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. 5 years of absolute, blissful silence from my blood relatives. 5 years of uninterrupted peace. Then, on a damp, foggy Tuesday evening in late October, the storm finally tracked me down. I was at the corporate office running late, finalizing a massive quarterly financial report for David. Sarah was working from our home office. My cell phone vibrated violently on my oak desk. It was Sarah. She absolutely never called during work hours unless it was a medical emergency or a crisis. I picked up on the first ring. Her voice was tight, fast, panicked. "Ethan, you need to come home right now. Immediately." I did not ask a single question. I grabbed my wool coat, sprinted to the elevator, and broke several speed limits getting back to our quiet neighborhood. When I pulled into the driveway, my tires screeching slightly, all the exterior security lights of our house were blazing. I jammed my key into the deadbolt, unlocked the front door, and walked in. Sarah was standing in the middle of the hallway. She was holding a heavy, solid metal baseball bat in her right hand. Her knuckles were white from gripping it so tightly. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and fierce protectiveness. "What happened? Are you hurt?" I asked, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. She did not speak. She just pointed toward the front door with the tip of the aluminum bat. Stuck to the polished wood of our front door, right at eye level, was a plain, unmarked white envelope. No postage stamp. No return address. It had not been mailed through the postal service. It had been hand-delivered. Someone had physically walked up to my porch, in my new city 3,000 miles away from my toxic past, and placed it there. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and ripped the envelope open. Inside was a single piece of cheap-lined notebook paper. The handwriting was erratic, messy, written by a hand that was clearly shaking with adrenaline or exhaustion. It read, "Ethan, we need to talk. I know the truth about everything. I will be back tonight." There was no signature at the bottom of the page. But I did not need one. I recognized that specific sloppy handwriting instantly. I had seen it on countless birthday cards, on shared middle school homework assignments, and on a formal groomsman invitation. It was Lucas. My carefully constructed sanctuary had been breached. The ghost of my past had painstakingly tracked me across the country, and he was standing right outside my door, threatening to drag me back into the mud. I looked at Sarah. I gently took the heavy baseball bat from her hands and set it against the hallway wall. I walked over and locked the deadbolt, sliding the security chain into place. I thought the absolute worst was over 5 years ago when I drove away from that house. I was so incredibly, naively wrong. The real reckoning, the explosion that would shatter my family forever, was just about to begin. I stood completely frozen in the brightly lit hallway of my home in Boston. The heavy, solid oak wood of the front door was the only physical barrier separating my carefully constructed, peaceful new life from the absolute toxic wreckage of my past. The thick brass security chain was firmly locked into place. The heavy deadbolt was fully engaged. Sarah stood just a few feet behind me, her posture rigid and defensive, the aluminum baseball bat still resting loosely but securely in her right hand. I took a slow, deep, agonizing breath, letting the freezing, undeniable reality of the situation wash over me. The ghost had tracked me across the country. I stepped forward, the floorboards creaking slightly under my weight, and pressed my face against the cold glass of the small peephole. Standing on my front porch, completely bathed in the harsh, unforgiving yellow glare of the motion sensor security light, was Lucas. I almost did not recognize him. The man standing on my welcome mat was a hollow, decaying shell of the golden boy I used to know. The Lucas of our hometown, the arrogant heir apparent who used to spend an entire hour meticulously styling his hair before a casual family dinner, looked entirely destroyed. He was wearing a deeply wrinkled, faded blue button-down shirt that hung loosely and pathetically on his thinning frame. He had clearly not shaved in several days. His face was covered in a patchy, unkempt, dark stubble that made his jawline look weak and tired. His eyes, which used to be so full of arrogant confidence, were heavily bloodshot and completely surrounded by deep, bruised purple bags. He looked exhausted. He looked thoroughly defeated. He looked significantly older than his 32 years. He was shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot, constantly looking over his shoulder out into the dark street, behaving exactly like a paranoid man who was actively running from a terrifying ghost. He raised his shaking right fist and knocked on the wood again. 3 sharp, frantic, desperate raps that echoed through my quiet hallway. I did not reach for the doorknob. I did not unlock the deadbolt. I pressed my mouth close to the crack between the door and the frame and spoke in a voice so incredibly low, flat, and cold that it actually surprised me. I did not yell. I did not scream. I told him he had exactly 10 seconds to turn around, walk off my private real estate property, and disappear into the night before I called the Boston Police Department and had him formally arrested and prosecuted for criminal trespassing. I heard him violently gasp on the other side of the door. He aggressively pressed both of his bare hands flat against the outside of the frosted glass. His voice was heavily muffled by the thick wood, cracking with a pathetic, rising panic. He begged me to just open the door for 5 minutes. He pleaded with me, swearing on our grandfather's grave that he had driven a rental car straight from Logan International Airport, that he had spent thousands of dollars hiring a private investigator just to track down my unlisted home address, and that he desperately, urgently needed to talk to me. He said, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob, that he finally knew the absolute truth about everything. I felt a sudden, sharp, dangerous spike of adrenaline flood my veins, but I aggressively pushed it down into the dark corners of my mind. I told him through the heavy wood that the appropriate time for talking had officially expired exactly 5 years ago, while I was literally bleeding out on the hardwood floor of his expensive wedding venue. I explicitly reminded him that the very last time we were physically in the same room together, he had cowardly attacked me from behind, shattered my nose, kicked my bruised ribs, and happily allowed our entire extended family to throw me out onto the street like a bag of rotten, contagious garbage. He started crying. Actual, loud, pathetic, heaving sobbing right there on my front porch for my entire affluent neighborhood to hear. He leaned his forehead heavily against the door and confessed that his entire life was rapidly falling apart. He said he was currently going through a brutal, heavily contested divorce. He told me that Vanessa, the woman he had ended up hastily marrying just 2 years after his disastrous, canceled wedding with Chloe, had completely and systematically destroyed him. The name Vanessa immediately triggered a dark memory buried in the back of my brain. She was a girl from his local high-end gym back in our hometown, a casual, overly friendly acquaintance who always seemed a little too intensely interested in his romantic relationship with Chloe. I asked him, my tone dripping with pure, unadulterated sarcasm, what his miserable, failed marriage had to do with me and the life I had built here. Through his pathetic tears, Lucas revealed the sickening, devastating, almost unbelievable truth. During a massive, plate-smashing, screaming argument over asset division, for 01k accounts and commercial real estate properties in the middle of their bitter divorce proceedings, Vanessa had completely lost her temper. In a blind fit of absolute, vicious spite, wanting to hurt Lucas as deeply and permanently as humanly possible, she confessed to the original, unforgivable sin. She screamed right to his face that she was the anonymous, invisible source. She was the one who fabricated the entire, elaborate story about me and Chloe having a secret, disgusting affair. She had wanted Lucas for herself from the very beginning. She saw how close our family was, saw how incredibly happy and secure he was with Chloe, and she systematically, coldly designed a massive lie to blow up the wedding of the decade. She fed him fake, highly specific details about non-existent hotel meetups. She expertly manipulated his natural, deeply rooted insecurities and jealousy. She planted the poisonous seeds, watered them with fake sympathy, and then stepped back to watch from the sidelines as he willingly burned his own life, his relationship with his bride, and his relationship with his best friend completely to the ground. I stood perfectly still in my hallway. The silence in my house was absolute and heavy. Sarah stepped forward and placed a gentle, grounding hand on my tense shoulder. Lucas begged me to let him inside the house. He said he was so incredibly, unimaginably sorry. He said he had been a blind fool, that Vanessa had expertly played him like a cheap violin, and that he just desperately wanted his brother back. He actually asked me, with zero irony in his voice, to give him Chloe's private contact information so he could call her and apologize to her, too. He genuinely, delusionally believed that presenting himself as a naive victim of Vanessa's sociopathic manipulation would magically, instantly erase the unbelievable trauma and public humiliation he had inflicted upon me. I leaned closer to the heavy door. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I spoke with absolute, clinical, surgical precision. I told him that Vanessa might have successfully lit the match, but he was the one who eagerly poured the gasoline all over the house. I told him that Vanessa did not physically force him to violently assault me from behind when I was defenseless. Vanessa did not force him to publicly humiliate his innocent bride in front of hundreds of people. Vanessa did not force our entire family, our parents and our aunts and uncles, to permanently exile me from my own hometown without demanding a single solitary shred of actual verifiable evidence. I told him that his pathetic apology was completely worthless to me because he was only apologizing now that his own comfortable life was in absolute ruins. He was not genuinely sorry for hurting me. He was just incredibly sorry that he got played by a gold digger. I told him to go back to the airport, to get on a plane, and to go back to the toxic, cowardly family that consciously chose to believe a ridiculous lie over their own flesh and blood. And then, without waiting for his response, I turned my back to the door and walked away. I walked into the living room, sat down heavily on the edge of the leather sofa, and pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. I navigated through the settings menu to my blocked contacts list. For the very first time in 5 long, quiet years, I unblocked my mother's cell phone number. Within 30 seconds, my phone began to vibrate violently in my palm. It was a torrential, overwhelming downpour of text messages. Long, rambling, desperate paragraphs of text. My mother had clearly been trying to frantically text me for days, and the exact moment the digital block was lifted, the massive backlog flooded into my inbox. I sat in the dim light of the living room and read them. She wrote extensively about the messy divorce. She wrote about the devastating, multimillion-dollar lawsuit Vanessa had filed, trying to legally claim half of Lucas's contracting business, his retirement funds, and the primary house. She wrote about how the entire extended family was in a state of absolute paralyzed shock. But most importantly, she wrote about how deeply, profoundly they all missed me. She desperately tried to frame the entire situation as a collective, unavoidable family tragedy. She repeatedly used soft, minimizing words like misunderstanding, manipulation, and unfortunate mistakes. She actually had the audacity to say that they were all innocent victims of a cruel, calculating sociopath, and that we urgently needed to band together as a united family to heal from this trauma. I read every single manipulative word. I read how my father wanted to immediately buy me a first-class plane ticket to come home for Thanksgiving dinner. I read how my sister Jenny had supposedly kept my old childhood bedroom exactly the way I left it, untouched for 5 years. It was a masterclass in narcissistic emotional manipulation. They were desperately trying to rewrite our dark history, trying to completely gloss over the sheer brutality of their actions by shifting 100% of the blame onto a woman I barely even knew. They wanted a clean, shiny slate without doing the agonizing, humiliating work of genuine public accountability. They selfishly wanted me to return to the fold, to smile for the holiday photos, and to play the familiar role of the forgiving, magnanimous son so they could finally stop feeling so incredibly guilty about being absolute monsters. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. I did not reply to my mother's frantic, emotionally loaded text messages right away. I let every single one of them sit on read. I wanted the deafening silence to stretch out over the miles between Massachusetts and Oregon. I wanted them to sit in their homes and feel a tiny, microscopic fraction of the agonizing, gut-wrenching anxiety I had felt during my first few deeply lonely months in Boston. Instead of typing a response, I opened my corporate laptop and initiated a secure, encrypted video call with Chloe. When her face finally appeared on the glowing screen, she looked absolutely radiant. She was sitting in the spacious living room of her high-rise apartment overlooking the spectacular skyline of downtown Chicago, sipping an artisan coffee, looking completely detached and elevated from the pathetic nightmare happening on the West Coast. I quickly and precisely summarized Lucas's pathetic, weeping appearance on my front porch and the subsequent deluge of manipulative messages from my mother. I told her the exact details about Vanessa's explosive confession during the divorce dispute. Chloe did not look shocked in the slightest. She did not gasp or cover her mouth. She actually let out a short, dark, incredibly cynical laugh. She shook her head slowly and said that it made perfect, terrifying sense. She reminded me of how Vanessa used to conveniently show up at the exact same coffee shop Chloe frequented, subtly asking probing questions about our family dynamics. But when I asked Chloe what she wanted to do about this revelation, her bright eyes hardened into polished, impenetrable steel. She leaned closer to her webcam. She said she was incredibly tired of being a silent ghost in their twisted narrative. She wanted to look them dead in the eye, one last time on her own terms, to show them exactly what they had brutally thrown away. We formulated a strict, uncompromising plan. Later that evening, I sent a single, brief, highly professional email to my mother's account. I told her that I would agree to a single family meeting, but only under my strict, non-negotiable conditions. It would be a digital meeting via a Zoom conference call at exactly 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Saturday morning. Everyone who had a hand in my exile had to be present on the camera. My parents, my siblings, Lucas, my Aunt Evelyn, my Uncle Arthur, and Chloe's parents, Mr. and Mrs. H. I explicitly stated that if a single person was missing from the grid, or if anyone attempted to record the session, I would immediately terminate the call and change my contact information permanently, erasing them forever. Saturday morning arrived with a cold, biting wind sweeping off the Boston harbor. I sat at the large oak dining table, a hot cup of black coffee in my hands. Sarah sat just off camera to my right, her hand resting reassuringly on my knee beneath the table, silently offering her unwavering support. I took a deep breath, centered my emotions, and clicked the button to start the meeting. One by one, the little digital boxes populated the screen. It was an incredibly surreal, almost out-of-body experience. Seeing them all gathered in the familiar living room of my parents' house, their faces visibly aged, lined with stress, and heavy with unmistakable guilt, felt like looking at a group of total strangers. Lucas was sitting awkwardly on the absolute edge of the floral sofa, staring intently at the carpet. My mother was already clutching a handful of tissues, wiping her red, swollen eyes. My father looked stiff, defensive, and deeply uncomfortable in his armchair. And there, sitting rigidly upright in the corner on two dining chairs they had brought in, were Mr. and Mrs. H., Chloe's parents. Mr. H. was actually clutching a large, leather-bound Bible in his lap. Chloe's video box remained black for a long, tense moment, displaying only her elegant name in white text. Then her camera snapped on. She looked absolutely stunning, wearing a sharp, tailored corporate blazer, her hair perfectly styled, radiating an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. The exact moment my mother saw my face on the large television screen they had hooked the laptop up to, she completely broke down. She started apologizing profusely, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate, chaotic rush. She cried that they were completely blinded by the overwhelming drama of the wedding day, that Vanessa had woven such an incredibly convincing, intricate web of lies, and that they had miserably failed as parents. My Uncle Arthur chimed in, clearing his throat awkwardly, trying to use his deep, authoritative businessman voice to appeal to my sense of familial duty. He actually had the sheer, unadulterated audacity to bring up the family inheritance and real estate holdings. He said that my late grandfather's complex estate was finally being settled through the probate lawyers, and they wanted to ensure my name was fully reinstated in the legal will and the family trust, as if a chunk of money and some property deeds could magically buy back my stolen dignity. I let them talk. I sat there in total silence and let them completely exhaust their pathetic, heavily rehearsed, hollow apologies. I watched them desperately, frantically try to construct a flimsy wooden bridge over a massive, yawning canyon that they had previously blasted with dynamite. When the room finally fell into a heavy, expectant silence, waiting eagerly for my absolution and forgiveness, I leaned forward toward the microphone. I told them, my voice completely devoid of emotion, that I did not want a single penny of their money. I told them they could keep the inheritance, the family home, the real estate, and their toxic legacy. I systematically dismantled their entire defense piece by piece, like a seasoned corporate lawyer dissecting a highly fraudulent contract in front of a judge. I pointed directly at the webcam lens and addressed my mother by her first name. I asked her if she remembered a specific sunny afternoon 5 years ago, the day before I moved to Boston. I reminded her of the private conversation she had with Aunt Evelyn in the kitchen, while the window was cracked open. I watched the color instantly drain from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified corpse, as I quoted her exact, damning words back to her. I told the entire crowded room that my mother knew the accusation was a lie. I told them that she had explicitly admitted to Evelyn that she knew my character, but she deliberately chose to sacrifice me to protect Lucas's fragile reputation and my Uncle Arthur's lucrative commercial real estate deals in the community. I exposed the undeniable, ugly fact that this situation was never about them being innocent victims manipulated by Vanessa. It was about them actively choosing the path of least resistance. It was about pure, unadulterated cowardice and the preservation of their social status at the country club. My father tried to abruptly intervene, raising his hand and raising his voice, but I cut him off with a single, sharp command. I told him he permanently lost the right to speak to me as a father the night he texted me to collect my trash from the garage like a stray dog. Then, Chloe unmuted her microphone. The tension in the digital room was so incredibly thick you could physically choke on it. Mr. H, Chloe's father, immediately started speaking the second he saw the green microphone icon light up next to her name. He used his deep, booming, authoritative church voice. He aggressively tried to quote scripture about the prodigal son returning home, about the divine necessity of forgiveness, and about the grace of God healing all earthly wounds. Chloe did not raise her voice. She did not yell, but her carefully chosen words hit the room like a physical, devastating blow. She stopped him mid-sentence. She looked directly at her father through the high-definition lens and said, "Do not you dare quote the Holy Bible to me. You did not show me a single ounce of grace. You maliciously packed my precious childhood memories into black plastic garbage bags and left them out in the pouring rain to be ruined. You legally threatened to cut off the college fund you had established, not just for me, but for my future unborn children. You used your influence to get me fired from my marketing job to protect your own pathetic social standing in the congregation. You treated me like a contagious disease because it was financially and socially easier than standing up to a baseless rumor." Mrs. H started weeping loudly, burying her face in her trembling hands. Chloe did not flinch. She did not offer a shred of comfort. She told them that they had failed their most basic, fundamental duty as parents, which was to protect their child from harm. She told them that her new, chosen family in Chicago, the incredible friends and the brilliant fiancé she had chosen for herself, possessed more moral integrity, loyalty, and love in their little fingers than her entire bloodline possessed collectively. The silence that followed her statement was absolute and final. They had expected angry children. They had expected a screaming match that they could eventually de-escalate. They had not expected this cold, calculated, surgical execution of their parental authority. We were not angry teenagers throwing a tantrum. We were highly successful, fiercely independent adults holding up an unforgiving mirror to their colossal, unforgivable failures. The psychological and social fallout from that definitive Zoom call was spectacular to witness. Once the comforting illusion of our potential return was violently shattered, the incredibly ugly truth behind their sudden desperation began to bubble to the surface. You see, when a highly toxic, narcissistic family system irrevocably loses its designated scapegoat, it inevitably turns on itself to survive. Over the next few weeks, through a few remaining, highly gossipy mutual connections from my old high school who had reached out via LinkedIn to apologize for their past behavior, the rest of the puzzle pieces finally fell into place. The twists just kept coming, peeling back the layers and revealing the absolute, festering rot at the very core of my former family and their associates. It turned out that Marcus, the supposed best man who had gleefully helped Lucas physically assault me at the wedding venue, had actually known the undeniable truth about Vanessa's lie for over 3 years. During a heavily intoxicated New Year's Eve party at a local bar, Vanessa had gotten blackout drunk and slipped up. She had arrogantly bragged to Marcus about how incredibly easy it had been to manipulate the entire situation, eliminate Chloe, and secure Lucas's contracting wealth for herself. But Marcus never said a single word to Lucas. He never defended my honor. Why? Because Marcus was currently a junior partner at my Uncle Arthur's massive commercial real estate firm. He was banking on a massive six-figure promotion and a highly lucrative senior partnership by the end of the fiscal year. He mathematically calculated that exposing Vanessa would deeply humiliate Lucas, publicly enrage my powerful uncle, and severely jeopardize his salary, his bonuses, and his entire future in the company. He actively, consciously chose his career trajectory over my innocence and his best friend's marriage. When Lucas accidentally found this out by reading old text messages during the brutal divorce discovery process, he completely snapped. The two former best friends ended up in a vicious, bloody physical altercation in the executive parking lot of the real estate firm, leading to Marcus formally pressing felony assault charges against Lucas and having him fired. But the most pathetic, mind-blowing revelation was Lucas's true, hidden motive for flying across the entire country to stand weeping on my front porch. It was never about genuine, soul-searching remorse. It was about pure, desperate financial survival. Vanessa was a remarkably ruthless opponent in the courtroom. She had hired a notorious, bloodthirsty shark of a divorce lawyer who specialized in completely dismantling high-net-worth individuals. Because Lucas had foolishly signed a series of terrible, legally binding financial agreements and joint venture contracts during their brief, highly chaotic marriage, Vanessa was systematically, legally stripping his assets bare. She was aggressively going after his contracting business, his personal savings accounts, his extensive 401k, and the primary residential house. They were also embroiled in a vicious, highly publicized custody battle over their two expensive golden retrievers, racking up tens of thousands of dollars in exorbitant hourly legal fees every single month. Lucas was functionally, undeniably bankrupt. His credit score was completely destroyed. My parents and his parents had already completely exhausted their available liquid funds and drained their emergency savings trying to bail him out of his endless legal mess. He came to Boston because his private investigator had run a comprehensive background check and an asset search on me. He saw that I was a senior executive at a major logistics firm. He saw the public county records of the prime, multi-million-dollar real estate I had purchased in a historic neighborhood. He knew my annual salary and bonus structure were substantial. He did not fly 3,000 miles to tearfully apologize for destroying my life and shattering my nose. He flew 3,000 miles to essentially ask the man he had beaten bloody for a massive financial bailout. He wanted a six-figure loan to pay his aggressive divorce lawyer so he wouldn't end up living in a motel. When I learned this absolute truth, any lingering, microscopic fraction of familial guilt I might have subconsciously felt about cutting them off vanished completely into thin air. It was incredibly, profoundly liberating. It was the final, undeniable confirmation I desperately needed that I had made the absolute right choice in leaving that town behind. They were not a family bound by love. They were a parasitic, opportunistic organism that only reached out their hands when they needed to feed on someone else's success. They had spent 5 long years aggressively treating me like a dead ghost, erasing my name from their lips, and the exact moment they realized the ghost had money, real estate, and a high salary, they suddenly miraculously believed in resurrections. It was morally disgusting, but it was also the profound closure I desperately needed. The narrative was finally complete. I was no longer the tragic victim of a terrible misunderstanding. I was the undisputed victor who had successfully outsmarted a den of manipulative thieves. Following that revelation, I took immediate, decisive action. I changed my personal cell phone number one final, permanent time, ensuring it was completely unlisted. I scheduled a private meeting with the head of my corporate security team at the Boston executive office. I provided them with high-resolution photographs of Lucas, my parents, my siblings, and my aunt and uncle, along with strict, uncompromising legal instructions to immediately deny them entry to the building and to call the local authorities if they ever attempted to show up at my workplace. I established an impenetrable, legally fortified fortress around my life, my flourishing career, and my hard-won peace of mind. I realized through this agonizing ordeal that setting strict boundaries is not an act of cruelty or vengeance. It is an act of profound, necessary self-preservation. You cannot heal your deep psychological wounds in the exact same toxic environment that made you violently sick in the first place. You cannot rationally negotiate with deeply broken people who view your innate kindness and forgiveness as a glaring weakness to be endlessly exploited. I had spent the entirety of my 20s desperately trying to be the perfect, compliant son, the reliable older brother, the loyal, steadfast cousin. I had contorted my own personality and sacrificed my own happiness to seamlessly fit into their rigid, demanding expectations, and my ultimate reward for a lifetime of devotion was a brutally bruised face, a shattered reputation, and a cheap canvas garbage bag full of my belongings tossed into the driveway. Now, well into my 30s, my ultimate purpose in life is completely, fundamentally different. My purpose is to fiercely protect and nurture the beautiful family I am actively, consciously building with my own two hands. Last Friday evening, the crisp autumn wind was howling off the dark waters of the Boston Harbor, gently rattling the historic, paned windows of our warm home. Sarah was in the spacious kitchen, humming a soft melody to herself while expertly preparing dinner. The incredible, comforting smell of roasted garlic, fresh rosemary, and baking bread filled the warm air. It was a simple, incredibly mundane domestic scene, but to me, after years of emotional warfare, it felt like a literal miracle. It felt exactly like walking out of a freezing, blinding blizzard and finally sitting down by a warm, crackling fire. I walked quietly into our master bedroom and opened the heavy bottom drawer of my solid oak dresser. Tucked carefully away in the far back corner, safely hidden beneath a thick stack of folded winter sweaters, was a small, unassuming black velvet box. Inside that box was a flawless, radiant-cut diamond ring. I had spent 3 agonizing months secretly searching for the absolute perfect one. Not an ostentatious, massive display of wealth designed to impress the superficial members of a local country club, but a quiet, breathtakingly elegant symbol of unbreakable, lifelong commitment and trust. I am proposing to Sarah next week during our planned vacation to the rocky coast of Maine. She is the incredible woman who fearlessly stood by the front door with a metal baseball bat to physically protect me from the ghosts of my past. She is the woman who looked at my deep emotional scars, heard my darkest stories, and saw unshakable strength instead of a liability. She is my real, chosen family. Chloe is officially getting married next spring in a beautiful, highly intimate ceremony in a historic building in downtown Chicago. Her carefully curated guest list is incredibly small. Absolutely no extended relatives from our hometown. No toxic, manipulative parents allowed. Just a tight, fiercely loyal circle of genuine friends and supportive colleagues who actually love and value her for exactly who she is. I am flying out a week early to proudly stand by her side as her man of honor. We are going to stand at that altar together, 2 scarred survivors who bravely walked through the absolute fires of hell, refused to burn, and came out the other side forged in unbreakable steel. Looking back at the smoking wreckage of my past, at the ashes of the relationships I once held so dear, I do not feel anger anymore. I do not feel bitterness. I just feel an overwhelming, profound sense of gratitude. If Lucas had never thrown that cowardly punch, if my own mother had never looked at me with that chilling disgust, if my father had never sent that text message, if I had never been forcefully packed into my car and driven away into the terrifying unknown, I would absolutely still be trapped in that suffocating, small-minded town. I would still be unknowingly playing a minor, supporting role in their endless, exhausting, dysfunctional drama. They genuinely thought they were destroying my life. They thought they were punishing me. In reality, they were setting me completely free. They maliciously burned down the prison I didn't even know I was living in, not realizing that I possessed the strength and the keys to calmly walk out of the ashes and build an empire of my own. I share this deeply personal story not out of a desire for petty revenge or bitterness, but out of absolute, triumphant defiance. I want anyone listening to this video to know, deep in their bones, that sharing blood with someone does not automatically grant them the right to emotionally or physically abuse you. True loyalty is actively earned every single day, not passively inherited through genetics. If you are sitting at a family table where respect, truth, and love are no longer being served, you have the absolute, undeniable right to stand up, push your chair back, and confidently leave the room. You can build a brand new table. You can invite far better, kinder people to sit with you. You possess the power to rewrite the ending of your own story. Thank you for listening to my journey. It has been a long, incredibly agonizing road, but I promise you, the view from the top is absolutely worth every single tear. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to find the courage to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.